In 1970, Freddie Mercury told Brian May something. It was specific. It was not a hope. It was not a wish. It was a statement delivered with the particular certainty of someone reporting a fact the rest of the world had not yet discovered. Brian May heard it. He laughed. He thought by his own account, in his own words, that Freddie Mercury was joking. He was not joking. Within 3 years, Queen had a record deal. Within 5, Bohemian Rhapsody was #1. Within 10, they were the biggest rock band on the planet. Within 15, Freddie Mercury stood at Wembley and delivered what every person who was there would spend the rest of their life describing. Brian May has spoken about that 1970 conversation many times. He has never quite explained how a 23-year-old with no record deal, no band, and no name anyone recognized outside a small cluster of West London art students could have known with that specific, unhesitating certainty that all of it was coming. But Freddie Mercury knew, and the question that has sat inside Brian May's account of that conversation for 54 years is the same question that sits inside every story about what Freddie Mercury was before the world understood what he was. Where does that kind of certainty come from, and what does it feel like to watch it come true? Farrokh Bulsara arrived in London from Zanzibar via India, via a boarding school in Gujarat, and an art college in Ealing, and by 1970 he was selling clothes at a market stall and going to concerts and studying every performance he saw with the precision of someone who was not simply enjoying the music, but learning from it. He was not yet Freddie Mercury. The name did not exist. The persona was still forming, assembled from the Zanzibar childhood, the Indian boarding school, the Ealing Art College, the West London music scene. He went to gigs. He watched performers. He filed what worked and what didn't. Brian May has said that even before Freddie joined what would become Queen, the quality of his attention to performance was unlike anything he had encountered in another person. Not enthusiasm, something more structured, more like someone who already knew the destination and was mapping the route. Brian May and Roger Taylor were playing in a band called Smile in 1970. It was a good band. It had recorded for Mercury Records, the label, not the person, and released a single that went nowhere, and it had built a following in the specific London circuit of university venues and college gigs where the serious music was happening. Tim Staffel was the vocalist. Freddie Mercury was not in the band. He was a friend of the band, specifically of Tim Staffel, who had been his friend from Ealing, and he came to the gigs and he watched, and he said things afterward that Brian May and Roger Taylor remembered long after the gigs themselves were forgotten. What Freddie Mercury said about Smile was not what the other people in the room said. He did not say it was good or that the crowd had enjoyed it. He said what was working and what wasn't, and why, and what needed to change, and what the audience was responding to beneath the surface of their response. Brian May listened. Roger Taylor listened. Tim Staffel listened. None of them quite knew what to do with the specificity of what they were hearing from someone who was, officially, just a friend standing in the crowd. But Freddie Mercury was not just standing in the crowd. He was already, in every meaningful sense, exactly where he intended to be. He was already exactly where he intended to be. This is the thing about the 1970 conversation, the one where Freddie Mercury told Brian May what was going to happen, and Brian May laughed, that makes it something other than a good story. It is not simply the story of a confident young man who happened to be right. It is the story of a specific, calibrated, completely unsentimental certainty that operated not as optimism, but as navigation. Freddie Mercury was not hoping things would work out. He was not manifesting a dream. He was reporting an itinerary. And Brian May, who would spend the next 25 years watching the itinerary unfold, has said that the quality of the certainty was unlike anything he had encountered before or since in another human being. Not loudness, not bravado, something quieter and much more specific. Something that, if you had been paying the right kind of attention, you would have recognized immediately as the particular stillness of someone who already knows. What Freddie Mercury said to Brian May in 1970 has been reconstructed from Brian May's various accounts, consistent in substance if not word for word. The substance: they were going to be enormous, not successful. Enormous. Brian May laughed. He assumed Freddie Mercury was being theatrical, the kind of grand extravagance young people with artistic ambitions sometimes produce as wishful thinking. It was not wishful thinking. What he was hearing and misidentifying as bravado was something he would come to recognize as one of the defining characteristics of Freddie Mercury: the specific refusal to hedge. Other people in that scene were hoping. Freddie Mercury was certain. The distinction seems small until you understand what it requires, not simply a high opinion of yourself, but a complete working knowledge of your own capabilities combined with the discipline to hold that knowledge steady in the face of a world that has not yet confirmed it. Freddie Mercury held it steady for 3 years, and then the world confirmed it. Tim Staffel left Smile in 1970. The reasons were various: a different direction, a different sound, the specific drift that happens when people who started together find they are heading toward different things. His departure created a vacancy. And Freddie Mercury, who had been watching Smile from the crowd with the focused attention of someone waiting for exactly this, stepped in. He did not audition. He did not tentatively suggest that perhaps he might be worth considering. He arrived. Brian May has described the arrival as something that changed the atmosphere of the room. Not dramatically, not with a fanfare or a declaration, simply by the quality of presence that Freddie Mercury brought into a space when he entered it, a quality that Brian May would later describe as something you could feel before you could name it. The band became Queen. The name was Freddie Mercury's choice. The direction was Freddie Mercury's. The specific theatrical ambition that would define every decision Queen made from the first rehearsal to the last concert was already fully formed, already operating, already carrying the complete certainty that Freddie Mercury had stated out loud in 1970, and that Brian May had laughed at, and that was now, without ceremony or announcement, beginning to be built. Beginning to be built. And Brian May was watching it happen. He has spoken about the early Queen years, the rehearsals, the first gigs, the specific experience of performing with Freddie Mercury for the first time, with the particular vocabulary of someone describing a revelation that arrived not as a single moment, but as a gradual, accumulating understanding that what they were inside was something genuinely extraordinary. The 1970 conversation was the announcement. The early Queen years were the evidence. And the evidence arrived with such consistency, with such specific and structured force, that Brian May has said he stopped being surprised by it relatively quickly, not because it became ordinary, but because it confirmed over and over, and with increasing clarity, the thing that Freddie Mercury had already told him was coming. It was not joking. It had never been joking. And Brian May, who had laughed in 1970, stopped laughing very quickly. Queen's first album was released in 1973. Mixed reviews, modest sales. No breakthrough. Freddie Mercury's certainty did not move. Queen 2 in 1974. 7 Seas of Rye charted, top of the pops. The first national television appearance, the first evidence, visible to the wider world, that what Freddie Mercury had described in 1970 was not a young man's fantasy, but a young man's schedule. Sheer heart attack. Killer Queen at number 2. And then, in 1975, a 6-minute song with 5 distinct movements became the biggest hit in the country, Bohemian Rhapsody. 9 weeks at number 1. Brian May, watching the chart position hold week after week, has said he thought about the 1970 conversation during those 9 weeks. He thought about the word enormous. He thought about the laugh. He thought about the distance between what Freddie Mercury had meant and what he himself had heard. The distance was the distance between someone who knew and someone still learning to believe it. Live Aid was July 13, 1985. Queen had 20 minutes. They used them. Brian May has described the hours before the Wembley performance, the particular stillness Freddie Mercury carried before any major show, the complete absence of visible anxiety. He had never been nervous in the way the word implies the fear that comes from uncertainty about whether you will be adequate. He knew he was adequate. He had known since before the task existed. The task had grown to include 72,000 people and a television audience of nearly 2 billion, and Freddie Mercury had simply grown with it. The 20 minutes that followed are the most documented in the history of live rock performance. Bob Geldof has described them. David Bowie has described them. Every musician who was there described the same thing. Someone operating at a level that exceeded the available frameworks for what live performance could be. Freddie Mercury walked off the Wembley stage as the most powerful performer in the world. He had told Brian May this was coming in 1970. He had told Brian May this was coming in 1970, 15 years before Live Aid, before the record deal, before the name, before the band, before the first rehearsal, before the first note of the first song that the world would hear. He had told Brian May, and Brian May had laughed, and Freddie Mercury had not been offended or deflated or revised. He had simply continued. This is the specific quality of certainty that cannot be faked and cannot be performed. It's indifference to non-confirmation. Freddie Mercury's certainty did not require Brian May to believe it in order to function. It did not require early success or critical approval or the chart positions that took 3 years to arrive. It existed independently of all of it, operating as a fixed point against which the rest of the journey could be navigated. Brian May has said that understanding this understanding, the specific quality of what Freddie Mercury had in 1970, took him years. Not because the evidence was slow to arrive, because the thing itself was so far outside the ordinary range of human confidence that it took time to recognize it for what it was. In 1987, Freddie Mercury received a diagnosis. In 1989, he recorded The Miracle. In 1991, Innuendo and the sessions that would become Made in Heaven. The people in the studio have described a working method unchanged from 1970. The same precision, the same certainty about what was needed and what was not. Brian May has said the final sessions, the last vocals, the last decisions about what would go on the record were conducted by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly how much time they had. Not slowly, not with the weight of someone watching the clock, with the focused efficiency of someone who understands the value of the time remaining and intends to use every second of it for exactly the right thing. All of it. The Miracle, Innuendo, Made in Heaven, produced by the same self-knowledge that had been present in a West London flat in 1970. In a 23-year-old with no record deal and no name, the certainty did not diminish, it simply continued. Brian May has given the account of the 1970 conversation many times. Each time, the essential elements are the same. The statement, the laugh, the subsequent understanding that the laugh was wrong. What changes across the retellings is the depth of what Brian May understands himself to have been hearing. In the early accounts, it was a story about confidence. In the later accounts, it has become a story about something harder to name. The specific quality of a person who does not simply believe in themselves, but who has a relationship with their own potential that is structural rather than emotional. Freddie Mercury did not feel confident in 1970. He knew the distinction matters because feelings change and knowledge does not. Confidence fluctuates with circumstance. Knowledge holds, and what Brian May was hearing in 1970 and misidentifying as youthful bravado was the specific sound of knowledge, the sound of a person reporting, with complete accuracy, the facts of their own capabilities and their own trajectory. He was right about all of it. The enormousness, the scale, the specific quality of what would happen when he stood on a stage. Brian May was there for all of it. He remembers the 1970 conversation. He remembers the laugh, and he has spent 54 years with the specific understanding of what the laugh meant, that he was in the room with something he did not yet have the vocabulary to recognize. He did not yet have the vocabulary to recognize it, but Freddie Mercury did not need Brian May to recognize it. He needed Brian May to play guitar, and Brian May played guitar. And everything else Freddie Mercury had said in 1970, the enormousness, the scale, the specific inevitability of it, arrived exactly as stated. No revision, no qualification, no moment at which the certainty had to be defended or explained or apologized for. It simply arrived. Wembley in 1985. the 9 weeks at number 1, the 120,000 people at Nebworth. The miracle and innuendo and the last sessions and the voice that Brian May has spent 30 years calling irreplaceable and meaning it precisely, all of it was in the 1970 conversation. Freddie Mercury put it there. Brian May laughed and then watched it arrive, piece by piece and year by year, until the watching was finished and only the remembering was left. In 1970, Freddie Mercury told Brian May that they were going to be enormous. He was 23 years old. He had no record deal. He had no name anyone outside West London had heard. He had a certainty that Brian May mistook for joking. It was not joking. Brian May has said this. He has said it clearly, with the specific directness of someone who has had 54 years to understand the difference between what he heard and what was actually being said. What was being said was the truth. What was being said was, I know what I am. I know what this is going to be. I know how it ends. Pay attention. Brian May paid attention. For 25 years he paid attention. For the record deals and the number ones and the Live Aid 20 minutes and the Nebworth night and the final sessions and the death and the 4 years finishing what Freddie had left for him to finish. He paid attention to all of it. And the 1970 conversation, the one he laughed at, the one he misread, the one he has been returning to for 54 years, is the thing that all of it was already inside. He said it. Freddie Mercury said it in 1970, in a West London flat, to a 22-year-old with a homemade guitar. He said it, and it was true. Every word.